Good morning, folks. Thank you as ever for tuning into the news at Ben. Now, the most significant bit of news flow, at least for me last week, was the surrender of yet another British overseas territory. For reasons that aren't entirely clear to me, it seems to have happened without much media fanfare, without any real pushback from the Conservative Party or indeed Reform UK. But the strategic interest handed over far exceeds that in importance of the Chagos Islands. And there was a lot of furore, correctly, a lot of furore over the Chagos Islands being handed over to Mauritius. But the handing over of Gibraltar to the European Union and to Spain seems to have taken place almost without notice. Now, before going further, I think it might be helpful to put Gibraltar into a little bit of context. Gibraltar came to the United Kingdom in 1713, following the end of the War of the Spanish Succession, and under the terms of the Treaty of Utrecht, which was a treaty between the Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese and ourselves, in which the Spanish relinquished Gibraltar to the United Kingdom in perpetuity. I'm just going to repeat that, in perpetuity. There is no legitimate claim to Gibraltar by the Spanish. It was handed over to us in perpetuity under an international treaty. And as many viewers and listeners will know, international treaties and law are often used by the governments, successive governments in this country have often been used to justify why they won't do the right thing by the British people. But actually, the handing over of Gibraltar to Spain and the EU last week by Starmer is a fundamental breach of international law because it belongs to us under international treaty. It has taken place without any consent of the Gibraltarians who live there, without any parliamentary consent, and yet again, without any international or other legitimacy. Gibraltar belonged to the United Kingdom. It should never have been handed over to Spain and the EU. And Gibraltar isn't just a rock in the Mediterranean. The reason we've held it for so many years, 312 years, longer than Northern Ireland has been part of the United Kingdom, and longer still than Chagos was part of the British overseas territories, is because it is of material strategic importance. Gibraltar was critical to us in the Napoleonic Wars, as it was in World War II. It provides control of the entrance to the Mediterranean, and no doubt would continue to have been of strategic importance if we had held it. It may only be 2.5 square miles in area, but it is vital as a strategic military base, and here we are giving it up to a competitive power in breach of our own constitution and international treaty. So what are the terms of the deal that Starmer's done with the EU and Spain over Gibraltar? They're broadly as follows, and you can verify this by looking up the detail yourself on the EU's website, which is where I'd go. It gives more detail than our own government's website, no doubt for the embarrassment that it causes our government to publish the complete unnecessary surrender of British territory. But roughly, this is what it says. It opens, like so many surrender agreements open, with a declaration that they recognise, or the EU recognises, that Gibraltar is British territory. And then everything else it does after that is the opposite of that recognition. It's similar, by the way, to the Northern Ireland Protocol, which opens with a recognition of the importance of the integrity of Northern Ireland, the Union of Northern Ireland in Great Britain, and the importance of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, etc., and then goes on to trump all of that. And it's the same with Gibraltar. So it opens with saying it recognises the integrity of the territorial position of Gibraltar as being a British overseas territory. But then it says, roughly, the following, that there will be freedom of movement between Spain, the EU on the one hand, and Gibraltar on the other hand, complete freedom of movement. Gibraltar will not just allow people without visas from the EU to come in or without any checks to come in. It'll actually be part of the Schengen zone, completely open borders with Spain. And there will be a border, effectively, for anyone coming in from the United Kingdom landing in Gibraltar. They would have to go through, first of all, they'd have to go through European or Spanish immigration checks, and then they would go through, subsequently, British checks. But the critical step there is that they would have to reveal their passport and their right to be in Gibraltar to a foreign power before they could go into Gibraltar itself. There can be no more optical representation of the handing over of sovereignty than that. And then it goes on to say, in addition, that there will be complete open border when it comes to trading of goods, effectively taking Gibraltar into the European Union customs. And there will be a level playing field in matters such as state aid, competition, employment, the environment, taxation, and it goes on and on and on. And a level playing field in all those areas basically means that as the EU makes laws for the European Union, Gibraltar will have to adopt them. So Gibraltar will become effectively a supplicant to the EU. It'll be subjugated to the EU. It's been annexed by the legislative authority and judicial authority of the European Union over and trumping any influence that the United Kingdom might have. If you have complete freedom of movement with the EU, if it is the EU that is guarding your border, if it is EU regulations and laws pursuant to which you exist, and therefore EU courts to which you must submit yourself, you have effectively been handed over to the European Union. No amount of saying that actually this remains a British territory gets you over that reality. In all respects, Gibraltar has left the United Kingdom. And that means it will cease to be a military base of any capability for us. It'll be the European Union and the Spanish that now control it. So the Treaty of Utrecht, which was meant to be in perpetuity, has been set aside without, as I said earlier, without any democratic legitimacy, without any legitimacy under international law. Starmer is riding roughshod over our own constitution, international law, and our own strategic interests by handing Gibraltar over. It's much worse than the Chagos Islands, because even though the Chagos Islands was an affront to the principle of constitutional integrity within the constitutional supremacy of the United Kingdom over the Chagos Islands, actually the Chagos Islands were uninhabited, and the strategic importance that they offered up was not to us, the United Kingdom, but to the United States. Gibraltar, on the other hand, has 34,000 Gibraltarians on it and was of strategic importance to us, but we've handed it over. And it should come as no surprise. It certainly doesn't come as a surprise to me, because we've done much, much worse than that. And the biggest example, again, you can probably guess what I'm going to say, is Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland isn't a British overseas territory. Northern Ireland is one component of the United Kingdom itself. It was formed in 1800 under the Acts of Union, which explicitly said that no international treaty should put Northern Ireland under a different footing, under any different sets of terms than any other part of the United Kingdom, in other words, Great Britain. To the extent that Great Britain benefits from certain laws, protections under international treaty, Northern Ireland is obliged to have all those same benefits, protections, etc. And that was laid out in Article 6 of the Acts of Union. But we trampled all over that in 2019 in the withdrawal agreement, which came into effect in 2020. We trampled all over that by effectively putting a border down the Irish Sea and subjugating the Acts of Union, effectively removing Northern Ireland, which has over 1 million British citizens living there, removing Northern Ireland from the union with Great Britain, again, without any international legitimacy, in breach of our own constitutional requirement, and in breach of the democratic rights of the Northern Irish, and indeed, by the way, in breach of the Belfast Agreement, which requires that there would be cross-community consent for any constitutional changes on the island. It seems that our successive governments are prepared to betray British interests in breach of all sorts of laws and international treaties, conventions, commitments, constitutions, etc. They're prepared to do that, but they're never prepared to stand for the British people and British national interests if they come remotely up against any form of pressure from the international order. And this all comes back to what I've been talking about for years and years, which is that we are not governed in this country with the interests of our own people and our own country being foremost. We are governed with the interests of the supranational order. And the supranational order will trample over its own laws and its own historic treaties in order to promote itself. Breaching the Treaty of Utrecht by handing over Gibraltar is an affront to the British people. Handing over Chagos to Mauritius without Mauritius having any legitimacy over it is an affront to the British people and the Chagosians. Handing over Northern Ireland, and just reiterate, over 1 million British citizens in Northern Ireland, handing over Northern Ireland to the EU and effectively therefore to the Republic of Ireland without any democratic legitimacy, without any international legitimacy, without any constitutional legitimacy, is a fundamental breach of the interests of people who live in Northern Ireland, the British people. It is an absolute travesty the way we're governed. And I'm afraid the Conservative Party and Reform UK don't seem to get it. In fact, Nigel Farage is on the record saying that a union of Northern Ireland with the Republic of Ireland is inevitable. He refers, it's a fine point, but I'm going to make it. Nigel Farage refers to Northern Ireland as the North. That is the language used by Irish nationalists. So there is no hope for the union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, no hope represented in Parliament, and there is no hope for the protection of our interests, both domestic and international, under Reform UK or the Conservatives. They're not banging the drum for the United Kingdom. They've been subsumed to some extent or another, to a lesser or greater extent, into this international order. We need a political force in this country which is actually, for once, going to say, to hell with the EU, to hell with these international laws if they come into conflict with what is in the interest of the British people and our own national interest. To hell with all of that. One of the problems with the political landscape is there aren't political parties which actually have foundational principles that require them to put the United Kingdom first. The full name of the Conservative Party is the Conservative Unionist Party, but they've long since forgotten what it means to be Conservative and Unionist. It was the Conservative Party that handed over Northern Ireland. It was the Conservative Party that put in train the agreement for Gibraltar, frankly, that Starmer has now completely caved in on. It was the Conservatives who first discussed the handing over of Chagos to Mauritius. I can't blame them for doing that because it was Starmer that did it, but they were entertaining it. So the Conservative Party has lost its way. Reform UK, frankly, doesn't really know what it stands for. It doesn't have a political philosophy. One of the reasons I was banging on about the need for democratization of the party was so that it could actually develop a foundational set of principles within that democracy. We need a political party that at its very core stands at least for one thing. And it's this one thing that it must stand for. It must stand for the constitutional and territorial integrity of the United Kingdom. It must make a declaration that under no circumstances would the acts of union that created this country, the 8 articles that constitute the acts of union, be allowed ever to be set aside. that we will die on a hill to protect the constitutional framework and our territorial integrity. That political force, ladies and gentlemen, I hope is coming soon.